Hi, my name's Patty Thomas. I'm the technical service rep for the C&H Mat Cutters. I've been doing this for about 20 or more years now, and what I'd like to do is just tell you how to properly maintain and adjust your C&H Advantage Pro mat cutter. All of these adjustments apply to the M40 Pro, the M48 Pro, the M60 Pro, and the extended base versions, which are the Pro Plus models. There's a few parts I'm going to go over with you. This plate down here, which is larger on some models, is called the material stop. This is the mat guide assembly. This plate here is called the mat guide slide plate. It has the ruler adjustment on it for setting your mat border width. This is the bar and rod assembly. This whole unit, called the cutting head, slides on the bar and rod assembly. And then we have the bevel blade holder and the straight blade holder and the baseboard. What I'd like to do is review the adjustments that need to be made periodically in order to maintain your cutter, and I also want to go over them in the order that they need to be performed in. The first thing you need to do is to check the material stop. This material stop needs to be perpendicular to the bar and rod assembly in order to make sure the rest of the machine is squared up properly. So what you want to do is take a carpenter square and lean it up against the material stop and the bar and rod assembly. I'm going to remove the mat guide. I'm going to take the carpenter square. I'm going to position it so that it's right up against the material stop, the short edge, and the long edge extends the length of the bar and rod. If this is out of square at all, what you need to do is take a big Phillips head screwdriver, loosen these screws that hold the material stop on, and then you can pivot this plate until this carpenter square and the material stop are squared up. Then you want to tighten these screws back down. All of the newer models have a plate that extends out 6 inches. There's 2 Phillips head screws on each end. After you make sure that the material stop is square to the bar and rod assembly, you're going to want to check your mat guide. The next adjustment that needs to be made is to ensure that your mat guide is parallel to the bar and rod assembly. To do this, what you want to do is set your mat guide at any setting. We're going to set it at 2 inches. There's a ruler here on the mat guide slide plate, and you use that to reference your mat border width. So I'm going to set this at 2 inches. I'm going to take a scrap piece of mat board. I have a small piece here, a 10 by 10. I'm going to put this under the bar and rod assembly with the slip sheet underneath the bar, because that's how you would normally cut your bevel opening, is with a slip sheet. I'm going to make a little pencil reference down here at 2 inches. You then want to move your mat up to the top here and make another reference line at 2 inches. As you can see, the top of the mat guide is over about a 1/16 more than the bottom of the mat guide. This mat guide is not parallel to the bar and rod assembly. So if you were to use this like this when you make your opening, the mat border is not going to be even from top to bottom. So what you need to do to adjust this is the top line and this is the bottom line, is loosen these 4 screws. You need the Allen wrench that came with the machine. This is the 7/16 inch Allen wrench. And you're going to pivot the mat guide while it's still tightened down. It pivots now to the left or the right. so that both ends are at 2 inches. Okay, this is 2 inches. I'm actually even going to make a reference line on the baseboard so I can refer to that spot if I need to at some other point. Then I'm going to go up to the top. I'm going to line it up with the pencil line along the edge of the bar. And then I'm going to pivot my mat guide so that they're both at 2 inches. Then you tighten these 4 screws down. Okay, so I have my material stop squared up to the bar and rod. I have my mat guide, which is now parallel to the bar and rod assembly. Now what I need to do is check the cutting head. I want to make sure there's no looseness or wobble in the cutting head. Any play in the cutting head is going to cause your blade to curve out when you're pulling through a mat. So to check this, you want to eliminate any play. Grab the slide block in your left hand or right hand and just give it a jiggle and see if you hear any play in there. If you hear any looseness, most of that can be adjusted out with 2 screws. There's an adjustment screw behind the straight blade holder. There's another adjustment screw in front of the straight blade holder, which you have to push down to access. You take your Allen wrench with the cutting head on the cutter. You put it into the recessed socket head screw. Which one is it? It was this one. And then you tighten these screws. You would want to tighten both of them until you eliminate any play along the bar and rod assembly. Every cutting head has bushings in it. Sometimes these bushings wear. They're supposed to wear, that's why they were placed there, so that the bushings wear as opposed to the slide block. These are called Oilite bushings, and you would access them by removing this set screw, taking out the bronze Oilite bushing, and then putting in the new one. You just pivot that until the openings are lined up and tighten the set screw. In order to get the cutting head off of the bar and rod assembly, all you have to do is remove these 2 Phillips head screws at the end of the rod. Take the block off, and then you can slide the cutting head right off the rod. You would want to do this in order to change those bushings. You also need to periodically clean inside of this cutting head. The way you clean that is to take a rag, paper towel with some kind of solvent. You put it on the rag and then just wipe down along the rod and then get inside this channel here. You can put the cutting head back on, put the block on, and tighten these screws. Then just check the block for adjustment again. There's no need to put any lubricant on the bar and rod assembly. The bushings, like I said before, they have the Oilite bearings in them, so they don't need any lubricant. Okay, after you check the material stop, the mat guide, the adjustment on the slide block, the next thing you want to check is the blade holder. The blade holder also needs to be tight against the block. Again, any movement in here is going to compromise the quality of your cut, so you need to make sure this is nice and tight. You can do that by holding onto the block with your right hand and then just grabbing it. If you feel it's loose, you need to access this bevel blade holder. The way you do that is to take these 2 Allen head screws off. This is the 1/8 inch Allen wrench. underneath this plate, you'll see a big shoulder screw. You need a big flathead screwdriver, and then you can remove this shoulder screw. Underneath this screw are thin little washers called shims, and if there's excess play in the blade holder, you might need to put a thicker shim in. There are shim kits that are available. They look like this. There's 6 different sizes of shims, and you want to try the thickest shim possible in order to eliminate any play in the bevel blade holder. Okay, put that back together. Okay. While you have the bevel blade holder top plate off, you might want to check it to make sure it is still flat. You take the bevel blade holder top plate off to check this, loosen the knob, and lay it on a flat surface. If you hear it rocking at all, that means it's probably bent a little bit from tightening the blade down over and over again. You may need to replace this part if this plate has bent. If it's nice and flat, you want to put it back together with the Allen head screws. And an important adjustment you need to make with the bevel blade holder is to make sure these screws are not too tight. These screws have to be a little bit on the loose side. The way the bevel blade holder works is you tighten this knob. These plates separate in the back, and they pinch the blade together in the front. That's what holds the blade in place. If these plates cannot separate, then you're not going to be able to pinch the blade in order to hold it in place. A lot of times a blade might be slipping, and the only adjustment you need to make is to loosen these Allen head screws a little bit. To put the bevel blade in the mat cutter cutting head, you loosen the knob, the knurled knob. You slip a C&H blade inside the blade holder between the 2 plates, and then you tighten down on this knob. The ideal blade depth, the edge of the blade should be right inside the point of this blade holder. The way you check your blade depth is to take a blade. I like the C&H 1200 single edge blades. The single edge blades are only honed on one edge, so they don't bend as much, but they can only go in the blade holder with the honed edge facing out. I'm going to slide the blade in, tighten it in place. I'm going to check the blade depth, and the best blade depth is to cut through your mat while barely cutting into the slip sheet. If the blade is out too far, it's going to cause flexing, and that could also cause a curved cut. You want to check the adjustment on the straight blade holder too. If you use that side of the cutting head, you want to make sure that blade holder is nice and tight also. The straight blade holder doesn't use, remove the blade, does not use a C&H blade. This blade holder uses a standard utility blade, and the way you put that in is to loosen the knob, push in the spring-loaded pin, push the utility blade back until it's behind the pin, release the pin, and tighten the knob. And that's how you put the straight blade holder blade in. So after you make all of the adjustments, the block, the blade holder, the straight blade holder, the mat guide, the material stop, you want to draw a pencil line along a mat, probably a longer mat than this, and you make your cut, and you want to get a nice straight cut that doesn't curve or flex and cuts right along the line that you've drawn.